Welcome to Rising Stars, where Miriam Knight, publisher of New Consciousness Review, interviews exciting new voices in the world of progressive and transformational books, films, and ideas, who offer intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us as we celebrate the conscious awakening and explore many expressions of consciousness in action.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rising Stars. I'm Miriam Knight, and I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Freddie Silva. For over a decade, Freddie has been a best-selling author and independent researcher of ancient systems of knowledge, alternative history, and earth mysteries. He has published 5 books, including Secrets in the Field, The Science and Mysticism of Crop Circles, and First Templar Nation, How the Knights Templar Created Europe's First Nation State. I actually interviewed him about that last book, and it's fascinating, so listen to that interview too. He's also an international keynote speaker, documentary filmmaker, magazine contributor, and conducts tours to sacred sites in Britain, France, Malta, Peru, Yucatan, and Egypt. Today we're going to talk about his latest book, The Lost Art of Resurrection, Initiation, Secret Chambers, and the Quest for the Otherworld. So welcome, Freddie.
Hello, Miriam. Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Now, resurrection is generally considered something you need to die for first. Tell me about living resurrection.
Well, I should sort of phrase that I was raised as a Catholic, and I've recovered since, obviously, from the books I write. And one of the things that I learned pretty early on is that if I'm going to follow something, regardless whether it's a religion or an idea, I like to do it for the right reasons, and I like to sort of pose a question as to what is it about the idea that I'm being given? Is it correct? Do the facts stack up? And in the last book that I was writing about the Templars, I kept coming across this concept of raising the dead and living resurrection, and it was something that the Inner Brotherhood was practicing as a kind of a mystical experience, a kind of an initiation. And I decided to take the idea a little bit further to see where this went and where did it come from. And my God, I mean, our concept in the Western world of resurrection as being solely experienced by one guy who is nailed to a cross and gets up 3 days later is completely fictitious. In fact, it's so old that by the time Jesus comes around, and he was a real guy, by the way, not to sort of downplay the whole thing. He was a very important initiate, but he was he was part of a long line of tradition of people who had figuratively been buried and then risen from the dead. The whole thing was a metaphor, and I've traced the whole story of initiation back to at least 3,000 years in China. So again, the Chinese can claim to have a first in resurrection as well. And it was actually sort of Mongolia. It wasn't really China, but in Mongolia there was a guy called Isu who in about 3000 BC gets nailed to figuratively nailed to a cross on the winter solstice, goes into the Otherworld, comes back 3 days later, and he's risen from the dead. And there are so many people around the world, even in Native America, in Persia, in Polynesia, as I'm just discovering, who also followed that similar process. And it was really to do with one of the most mystical initiation practices that was reserved for a few people who were, lucky and also determined enough to go through with this experience, which when they came back from the other side, they went about living their daily lives and as if they basically had experienced a kind of an awakening, and they became extraordinarily spiritual people. So it turns out that the whole idea of resurrection, or the living resurrection, is much more important and much more personal than we've actually been led to believe.
Well, certainly from your description of the Egyptian practices, you got the impression that it was almost required of anyone aspiring either to pharaohhood or even the priesthood.
Oh, very much so. And it was open to everybody, including women. And that's what was really surprising, that sects in the Middle East, in Palestine, and in the Mediterranean were actually indoctrinating women as well. And in fact, the women, going back to Persia, were actually fundamental to the whole initiation process, because they were actually the people who actually looked after the initiate during their sojourn. Actually, it was a near-death experience. It was an induced near-death experience, which sounds quite harrowing, really, when you think about it. But they did it, and the whole idea was that you volunteer to have this out-of-body experience, go travel in the other world, and really differentiate yourself from what shamans were doing, which is sort of take in narcotics and to influence what you were seeing on the other side. They actually did it very, very differently. They actually had a real experience as though you and I are here in this world. They were having exactly the same experience walking about in the other world and coming back to tell about it. So it was something that people actually aspire to, and anyone that was curious was allowed into into these mystery schools. They were kept under observation for about a year, and if they were deemed to be responsible people who would keep certain secrets, because you didn't want just every Tom, Dick, and Harry to go around experiencing this. There was an actual process you had to go through, because it was quite dangerous. There were certain limits, things that could be done and achieved. So they wanted to make sure that only people who were specifically trained in this art would actually go through with it. And 3 years later, if you had gone through all the procedures, you would, as a final stage of initiation, be placed in a sarcophagus, or a kind of a bathtub, as the Greeks called it, or a wooden box. In the Polynesian islands, you'd even be buried alive with a tube sticking out of the earth. But 3 days later, you would come back, and you'd be risen, and you looked around you, and you'd say, wow, there's much more to life than just an ordinary living where you are born, you suffer, and then you die. There's something much, much greater, and you can tell from the accounts of these people who they didn't reveal that much, but what they did reveal was enough to show that the experience was literally worth dying for, if you pardon the pun.
I really do believe that pun is the highest form of humor, not the lowest.
Actually, the Egyptians invented the pun. They didn't take words very seriously. They felt that words were actually a poor description of reality. So in order to make sure that people didn't take themselves too seriously when they were making out words, they invented the pun. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Indeed, you look at these serious guys sideways on the hieroglyphs. Anyway, I'm kind of curious, because the literature of near-death experiences has been flooding out in recent years. So the reports, or the process that you could glean from your studies, does it follow in any respect the results that, Moody and co. and Eben Alexander and Anina Morjani are experiencing when they report their own near-death experiences?
They're very similar. In fact, I was in Montreal giving a presentation last year, and Susan Baruch, who's an MD who's published work on near-death experiences. It's interesting that our talks followed each other, and I had no idea about her work, and she had no idea about mine. But it's funny how we're both talking about exactly the same thing, one from a more mystical point of view, and hers coming from a strictly medical and imperative point of view. And we were amazed that people 5,000 years ago were experiencing the same thing. The big difference was that these experiences were voluntary near-death experiences, and they were induced, whereas most of the modern-day exercises are not induced. They are actually either shamanic, which is very different. It's related, but it's very, very different, because you are, to a certain degree, out of control. Or they are actually involuntary near-death experiences where you are, for example, you've taken an overdose, you're in a coma, and you travel about the other world and you come back. These experiences that the Greeks, the Egyptians, and so forth were describing, and the accounts that do survive, because they were heavily edited and also destroyed by the church for obvious reasons, because obviously if this experience could be done by anybody, they would lose their job. They wanted to make sure this information never got out. But people like Plato wrote about it.
It sounds like the pharmaceutical companies today.
Nothing changes. It's like different folks, same strokes, isn't it? But there are people like Plato and Pythagoras who actually did go for these experiences. They were forbidden by law to specifically describe it, so they wrote about it in using fictional characters to get around the problem. And it was quite clear that they were in total control. So, for example, you could be sitting at your desk right now looking out of the window as I am at the beautiful blue water of the Atlantic, smelling the flowers. You'd have exactly the same experience on the other side. You would be completely conscious, totally aware. And this is where the Egyptian texts come in very useful, because there are several chambers that were found under pyramids, and one unusual chamber, to say the least, in the Valley of the Kings, where no one was actually buried in it, which is kind of weird. The actual text written on the walls actually describe in absurd detail every single hour of the dark night of the soul, where you have to remember certain chants and incantations to get you through safely to the other world and back. And it was this technique where your soul, I'm not talking about the brain here, I'm talking about the actual oversoul of the individual, is in total conscious control of its movements out of body. So if you compare that to, say, when you're in a dream state during REM sleep, you know that you have no control over your REM sleep. I mean, you just go wherever your soul goes. You meet unusual people. You're in interesting places that you've never seen before, and yet they're profoundly real. But yet you have no control. These people had complete control of where they were going. They knew how to come back at an appointed time, much like the siddhi of the Indian practitioners in India. They have complete control of the out-of-body state, where they can actually go into a comatose state for a year, and they will give you the exact minute when to come back and dig your body out of this sarcophagus, and they'll be perfectly alive. And that was the big difference, the fact that all this was done with total control.
Wow. Well, we'll pick this up after the break. I'm speaking with Freddie Silva about the lost art of resurrection.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi everyone, this is Shay Parker, the host of Best of the Best, which airs live right here on IOM Radio every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm super excited to bring you expert guest hosts, spiritual discussions, free psychic readings, and so much more. I can promise that you will not want to miss this one-of-a-kind, fun, yet touching, down-to-earth show. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on OTR-FM. This is Shay Parker, and I can't wait to see you there.
Mother, Mother Ocean.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. West Indian manatees are one of the most unique animals on Earth, and we're still finding out so many new things about them. But manatees are endangered, and many of them are killed or injured each year because of watercraft collisions or other human activities. You can help save these gentle marine mammals. For free tips on what you can do, call Save the Manatee Club at 1-800-432-JOIN. Thank you.
Welcome back. I am speaking with Freddie Silva about the lost art of resurrection. Freddie, tell me, do you have a website?
Oh, yes, I have several, but the main one is invisibletemple.com.
You really have become probably one of the world's experts on the whole idea of temples and the use of temples. It's quite fascinating to read some of your quotes about the purpose of temples. Share that with us.
It actually comes from a lot of experience. I mean, we sort of start off our life as tourists, and we go around to, the pyramids and Stonehenge and places like that, and we look at the stones. We appreciate the markings, the painting, and the way that the whole thing has been so beautifully constructed. But once you get past that and you start actually having this intimate relationship with these sites, they talk back to you. And it was a huge surprise to find that I would go walkabout in these sites. And I was very spoiled for a part of my life. I mean, I lived in between Avebury and Stonehenge in England, so every afternoon I'd take a sandwich and work out which one to go to, and then come back and write about it. Yes, it's one of the perks of my job. And but after a while, I began to realize that I'm getting so much information at these sites. It's as though someone's actually talking into my ear, and then I make notes. And it's a very loud voice, and you sort of go back and research it, and you find out, yes, the information is all there. And I began to take this a stage further, because what I try to do is not just talk about things from a mystical point of view. I like to back it up with hard science. I try to link a bridge between the two worlds, so that should you ever go into a formal dinner conversation and people ask you about temples, well, you can sort of not see them running away from the table, and you'll be invited back when you start giving them hard science as to why you call these things living organisms, because that's what I do. For me, a temple is a living, breathing organism, and it surprised me thousands of years ago that the priests used to go around to each room of the Egyptian temples and awaken each room as though they're bringing a sleeping person out of a deep sleep. And I wondered, is it really true? Because so many of these myths incorporate such a wonderful truth, but obviously it's written from their point of view and it makes no sense to us. So I began to look into the electromagnetic side of things, and found out that, yes, virtually every temple on the face of the earth, without exception, including the Gothic cathedrals in Europe, which are built over existing temples, all of them are basically breathing all day long, and that is that the electromagnetic signature of these temples regenerates itself roughly every 18 minutes, and they emit these ripples which are measurable. They all lie at the crossroads of the Earth's telluric currents, what some people call energy lines or the Earth currents. So all of these things have a profound effect on the human body, because we're made up of exactly the same stuff. And there's the rub, because the temples, from whether you're in Yucatan or in India and Egypt, they'll always talk about how they were built to transform an ordinary person into a god, into a bright star. And the idea is that when you walk into these temples, you become a mirror of the temple, because the temple is also a mirror of the perfection of the cosmos. So the idea was that our predecessors went through a lot of trouble to build these enormous sites in order to make sure that they would survive into a time such as today, where we had lost the plot. And we really have. As a society, we have lost the plot. We are so out of touch with reality, with the natural world, that we need a place to go to remind ourselves of the big connection. And it humbles us. And I can't tell you how many times I've done this and how much I've written about it, and it still surprises me when I visit these sites. In fact, I'm about to take a group to Peru in a couple of months. Can't wait for that one. And we go to these places, and you come back and you're different. You really do feel like you're a god. And I'm not talking about your ego getting bigger. I'm talking about you feeling as though you've come here to do something much more than you thought. You do feel much more connected to the way of nature. You become much more sensitive, intuitive, and even psychic in some cases. So the temples are built in such a way that they do allow you to become much better than you thought you were, much more connected to the bigger picture. And when that happens, your life changes totally. So it's a bit like having an out-of-body experience. And so not surprisingly, there's the there's also the overlay here where some of the temples were actually also used for the initiation ceremonies of travelers to the other world. So they don't only fulfill a function of enlightening you as a person and making you into a god, but they also serve to take you into another level of reality, just to show you that you are part of a much, much bigger picture. And what you do down here, all your actions, all your thoughts, they reverberate into infinity. So it makes you much more responsible as a human being, and certainly makes you feel alive.
You described an interesting experiment done by members of the Princeton group at sacred sites. Do you want to share that with us?
Oh, that's an incredible story. Princeton, up until about 10 years ago, I think this specific group, this splinter group, is now closed, and I'm not sure whether it's done so because of lack of funding or because it just basically all died of old age. I mean, they have been going for quite some time. Robert Young, who was the leading scientist, and his fellow members, they started something called PAIR, which is the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Department. And they basically were doing essentially what I've been doing, which is to blur that line between science and mysticism. And some of the experiments, most of which are peer-reviewed, and which I believe are still found online, are extraordinary. And it's mostly to do with the inclusion of consciousness and how consciousness can be measured, and how it also interacts with the field of consciousness around the Earth itself, and possibly even beyond. And some of the experiments are extraordinary. There was one where they actually took a piece of quartz, they put it into a vacuum, threw sound at it, and before you know it, the rock levitates. We've been wondering how they moved megaliths for years, and they finally cracked it. But some of the most extraordinary experiences were really to do with how they found a way to measure consciousness. So they would develop a machine, a kind of computer, and they were able to actually take this to specific sites and find out if the site was special, if it was sacred because of a certain numinous quality, or because people who went there to meditate and pray made it so, or maybe because it was the inclusion of both, where people went to a place that was already energetically different, plus the use of prayer really made it very, very different than temporal space. And they did many experiments here in America. They went to Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and I can guarantee you it's not called Devil's Tower by the Native Americans. They also went to car parks just to sort of act as a test to show that you can do a control sample to show that yes, in a car park, if you meditate in a car park, you're not really going to have any measurable effect on the spirit of place. But when they went to Egypt and took these machines with them, they found that the temples just by themselves were measuring effects as high as a meditating group. So the temple itself is alive. But they were amazed to find that when people connected with the temple and did their meditation at the temple, then the two go hand in hand. The inner temple and the outer temple come together, and they really just drove the characteristics of the machine off the scale. So again, we are approaching that milestone in our scientific technological background here on Earth, where we're finally catching up with what the ancients knew.
You had a mind-blowing experience in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Tell us about it.
Oh, yes. I've had a few in my lifetime. It's funny because usually you sort of go to these places and you expect something to happen, and nothing ever does. And I'm actually very fortunate in the sense that I tend not to know what I'm doing when I do things, and it's actually really helped me because I take into these places no idea of what's going to happen. I'm not expecting anything to happen. I'm just going like a child, like a piece of blotting paper, and expecting whatever happens to happen. If not, that's fine too. The spirit of the place is fine. But on this particular occasion, there was a group that I work with in England, a channeling group, and we decided to go and clean up some of the damage that people have left behind at these temples. And I'm talking about spiritual damage, because these places remember everything. The way that they're built, the type of stone, everything, they remember everything. So if you do silly things in the Great Pyramid, it will remember it. So someone has to clean it up. So we went there. There were 6 of us that managed to go into the actual king's chamber that day. And if you've ever been there, you know how noisy it is. The place is so acoustically tuned that you can drop a pin and it'll be like listening to Black Sabbath. It's so loud in there. And we weren't able to get special access. We thought, well, how are we going to do our work quietly with tourists running around? Well, no sooner have we said that, the entire building was vacated. Two of the women who were with us, they didn't feel at ease in the king's chamber, so they left. And that's fine, because the big pyramid is built to a certain frequency, which is more of the masculine energy. The next one is actually more of a female energy, in case anyone's concerned. There is a pyramid for everybody. So the four guys are in there. Four he-men are in there. The lights go out, which is very rare in the Great Pyramid. We're in total darkness, and we decided to do a tone in the limited time we had in there and honor the spirit of place and do what we've been instructed to do. And lo and behold, as God is my witness, these people came out of the rocks. And remember, we're in total darkness. You can't see anything. It's blacker than a blackest coal cellar. And I'm seeing these, what look like 33 people coming out of the stones, surrounding us in a circle, dressed in the most beautiful sort of satin, very, very tall as well. And I just remember opening my eyes, and I'm seeing them, and they're sort of bowing, and I'm bowing back, and we're all toning. And I thought, the only thing that kept going through my head is, I hope these other three guys can see this, because I think I've gone mad. And we kept doing this. They disappeared. We took turns going into the sarcophagus when no one was buried, of course, and that was part of the living resurrection tradition, was carried out in there. And 20 minutes later, a very angry Arab person can be heard shouting from below, and I thought, okay, we've obviously overstated our welcome, let's go down. And we left, and we were very dazed. We came out of there, and the rest of the group that hadn't managed to get in, we were very excited to find out what happened, what did we do in there, and none of us could talk. I mean, we're completely speechless, and there's four guys, and of course, being guys, none of us wants to say anything. And I looked at one of them and I said, all right, yeah, exactly, I'll go first. Did you see what I saw in there? And the next guy repeated exactly what I had seen, and we all had had exactly the same experience. And the best part is that the rest of the group, who were renowned channelers, they actually had tuned into the room to find out what we were up to, and they described exactly what we had seen, and I hadn't even told them anything. So you have here a lot of validation going on here, and it happens all the time. This magic happens all the time to anyone who is in tune with these sacred sites. They will interact with you. They will take you to another level of reality, and they'll make your reality that much more special.
Incredible magic indeed. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back speaking with Freddie Silva about the lost art of resurrection, initiation, secret chambers, and the quest for the other world. Be right back.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Have you wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Hi, this is Christina Ricci with RAIN. Every 2 minutes, another American is sexually assaulted. If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, you are not alone. Help is just a call or click away through the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Please call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's HOPE. or visit rain.org. That's RAINN.org.
Brought to you by Rain and this station.
Welcome back. I'm Miriam Knight, speaking with Freddie Silva. Freddie, one of the most heartbreaking tragedies of history, in my view, was the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. Now, why did early Christianity feel that it needed to absolutely obliterate the human legacy of all those millennia?
Oh, actually, it goes back to the whole foundation of the church. And, I mean, in fact, I was actually curious about this myself, where there was a certain point in history where Gnostic Christianity could so easily have actually ruled the day, whereas we've actually ended up with fundamentalist Christianity, which is not the same thing that Jesus was teaching at all. And if you look at the banned Gospels, and that should give you a good clue, the banned Gospels, if you read the Gospels of Thomas and also specifically of Philip, you begin to realize what the big chasm was about. And it was that the Gnostic Christians, who really were following the ideas that Jesus was laying down, and Jesus, of course, and John the Baptist were initiates of the living resurrection, they were essentially saying that God is an inner experience. The fundamentalists, who are neither very fun and they're very mental, they are claiming the exact opposite, that God is an external experience, and that's how the church basically put its foundation. So everything that the original sect of the Nazarenes were saying, and it's important here to also to, I'm going to try and sort of paraphrase this because it's a long story. It's important to understand that there was no such thing as Jesus of Nazareth. The Nazareth of the day did not exist in his time, but a Nazari or a Naziru was a term. It was a title given to people who actually were high priests who had gone through the initiation of living resurrection, and they were the only people who were allowed to administer it to others. So Jesus, John the Baptist, and company were part of an actual sect who were basically following a very ancient tradition of living resurrection. When Jesus goes AWOL and basically disappears to, well, this is a point of contention. We don't know whether he disappeared off to India, whether he just disappeared to the Arabian Peninsula. We certainly know that Mary Magdalene, who was a high priestess in his position, she obviously went to France, and that is well documented. At this point, we have a bit of a problem because the Roman Empire has collapsed, and as always happens in a vacuum, power starts to want to take over. So you have all of these millions of people in Europe and the Mediterranean who need guidance, specifically spiritual guidance. And that's where you get the bishops realizing this is a great opportunity to invent a new religion. And they began to systematically remove all the esoteric traditions that Jesus was talking about, and also removing all the connections that existed to earlier resurrected God-men. And they eventually forced Constantine, the emperor, to formalize Catholicism. Constantine was essentially a follower of Mithras, who was a very old tradition of living resurrection. Same thing, a god-man who's a shepherd who goes into a mountain, into a cave, and the winter solstice gets up 3 days later, raised from the dead. Essentially, Constantine just took out the word Mithra and put in Jesus, and lo and behold, you have a new tradition. The problem was that in order to maintain this tradition and the bunch of lies that went with it, the priesthood that were now founding Catholicism had to eradicate all its connections to the past. Because if you could figure out where they had borrowed the ideas and yet turn them into a centralized priesthood, it could be bad news. And there was one time where they nearly failed in their attempt to take over, and that's when the whole burning of the books started. They wanted to make sure that every single available manuscript that related the true origins of Christianity, going back 3,000 years, were obliterated. So the final conflict really came down to Alexandria, where all the remaining libraries, all the libraries of the Middle East were suddenly put in one location, which, when you think about it, in hindsight, was really a bad idea. You never put all your money in the same bank account. But that's history. And so that's what happened. They basically wanted to make sure that every single manuscript that was dealing with the esoteric self-empowerment of the individual was removed. It just happened that they also burned 30,000 other volumes to go with it by basically inciting a mob. And it's always people who really have little understanding of the bigger picture that are incited by a select few to go and make trouble on their behalf. And the same happens throughout history, as you've noticed, but that's the story of the earth. So from that point on, Catholicism wins and Christianity loses, and the two are not the same. And this is not me on my soapbox. These are facts that can be validated by Scripture and by the actual evidence that's available. And one of my heroes, the late Michael Bajent, also followed in this idea, and he also came to exactly the same conclusion. So I'm not the only person that's saying this by any means, and certainly not the last. So it's important to realize that this whole concept of the living resurrection as the highest form of initiation was important because it was self-empowering. And in a formalized, centralized religion system, you can't have that because it puts a lot of people out of work. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about it now, because I think we're at a point where, and specifically now with a new pope in Rome who's, in my opinion, is a very open person. I actually like what he's done so far. I'm actually going to have to step back and stop criticizing the church because I believe that his heart is in the right place and is actually doing some extraordinary things. So, let's give things time and see where they go. But the whole concept of self-empowerment is coming back, and more people are now shunning formalized religion for retreats, for personal introspection, and that's exactly what they were teaching thousands of years ago. It's about you discovering yourself and discovering the position of your soul relative to your body and its position within the bigger scheme of things. And that's why they, took 3 years out of your life to say, hey, come and look at how you really can have a conscious control of your manifestation process by learning these techniques that have been shared around the world in these secret initiations. So that's why it was very important and why it was also taken out of commission.
Well, the ironies in all of this are just over the top. But
believe me, it's a big cosmic joke. But that's why we're here.
But it's an interesting time to be here because, on the one hand, we are distancing ourselves from the edifices, from the temples, from the places that anchor this spiritual energy. But on the other hand, we're looking for it more and more inside. People are going on shamanic journeys. They're taking interesting herbal substances to try and recapture this sense of connection to the mystery. It seems to be much more within our grasp than it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that you're taught in mystery schools is that the Earth has certain timings. Everything is done for a specific reason, and it's all to do with the precessional cycle, the zodiac, how every couple of thousand years, each era on Earth has an overarching principle. And as much as I decry the loss of sacred sites and the commercialization and the Disneyfication of sacred sites, there is a reason why they are slowly falling apart, and they serve their purpose well. And the fact that, even Jesus talked about this, that, the temple actually resides inside you. So it's funny that you should say this, that yes, we are discovering that there is an inner temple going on, or as I call it, the invisible temple, because we look at these material places that we travel to in Angkor and in Giza and so forth. But eventually, you don't really have to go very far to find that connection. And I believe people are beginning to realize that formal religion is hollow. It's been so hijacked either by dogma or extremists that it makes no sense to me in my daily life. So why should I follow this? I might as well just take time off in the woods and go meditate. And you're doing exactly what the ancient people, the very, very ancient people, used to do before they even built temples. They only built temples basically as a remedy when people had actually lost the plot. In fact, it reminds me of a great joke that's actually written on the temple of Edfu. It says, until we will keep building temples until people realize they are the temple. So if people still hadn't got it, they'll put up more temples. So it was a bit of a joke there that was
Can
going
you hear
on.
Me now?
And so, yes, I believe that we have come around to this specific era where things are falling apart into chaos, but we're also experiencing a huge amount of chaos in order to jump to a new level of order, and that's something that any physicist will understand. The whole universe is based on order and chaos, and the change from one to the other and the level of change from one to the other defines the potential to that new level of change. So the more chaos there is right now in the world, the bigger the potential jump to a new level of order. We just have to ride this elegantly. We are here for a reason. We have chosen to be here. When you think about it, this is the first time in recorded history, and as far as anyone knows, that more souls have been born on the earth at this time than any other period in life. Think about that for a second. There's obviously a momentous occasion taking place here. Everybody wants to be part of this enormous circus, this enormous play. And so there's more than idle conjecture that it is an important part of history that is happening right now. And some of us are here to facilitate it. Some of us are here to be martyrs for it, and some of us are here to be observers. And all of us are playing the right part. And so that's the one thing that I always tell people who think that you can't cope with all of this change and it's beyond me to change. No, you just play your part. You tend your garden and show other people that this is the garden I'm going to create. And if other people want to copy you, fantastic. And that's the best you can do. You can only change as much as you are capable of and comfortable of doing within your own sphere of influence. So let someone else worry about the next bit, because there will be someone else to take care of that.
And I think if we look at our own lives, that we can put up with minor discomforts, and it's a bit like the frog in the pot. If you turn up the heat slowly, it'll stay in and get cooked. But if you have the kind of dislocation and disruption and murders and bombings and pervasive things on the media that you absolutely cannot hide your eyes from, then you internalize this discomfort and you become much more open to alternatives for change than you would otherwise be.
Yeah, and I think also it's worth bearing in mind that we're all here to have an experience, and all our experiences are all different. Some people come here to experience pain. Some have come here to experience becoming millionaires, and it's your experience that counts. That's the valid thing. So don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Just follow your line, do the best you can, and try and be an example. That's what Gandhi said. Indeed. I think he had it right.
Well, oh my goodness, it's going so fast. We'll be right back with Freddie Silva. Stay with us.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Join me, Maggie Chula, on Mondays at noon Eastern for Mastermind with Maggie. Let's work together in a mastermind. We can resolve life's problems and create goals for the future. Build action steps empowering you to create your life in partnership with your divine source of light, your soul. Manifesting your goals can be simple and easy, so come with your problems and leave with a plan. The Akashic Master Teachers and I are waiting to help you.
Hi, this is Carly Simon for LifeBeat. The music industry fights AIDS. The AIDS crisis isn't over. There have been amazing scientific breakthroughs, but people are still dying, and your local AIDS organization needs your help more now than ever. Volunteer and make a difference.
Well, that's us back. I'm speaking with Freddie Silva about the lost art of resurrection. Freddie, do you believe that there is a kind of fundamental struggle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness going on now?
Oh, it's always going on. It's nothing new.
I mean, particularly now.
No, I just think that it's perennial. In fact, if you just take, for example, just the last week where we get so much bad news coming from Europe of, some very misguided people just going out mindlessly killing innocent civilians, we seem to think that there's something really quite horrible going on. Yes, there is, but at the same time, if you compare it to, say, the Middle Ages, we're living in paradise right now. And back then, entire countries would be, armies would be marching through your house every week. You would know what was what. And on top of that, you had the Inquisition coming over to knocking your door every couple of hours, stealing your wife and murdering your children. People of color were hung upside down, hung, drawn, and quartered. If you weren't anything except a straight male, the same thing would happen to you. So I think we're actually living in fairly comparatively quiet times. It's just that we have so much more access to the media, and we have so much more that's shoved in front of us that it makes you feel like it's an intolerable situation. Not to make light of it, because these events are not good, but I think that there's always a struggle going on. The one thing that is accentuating at this particular point in time is the fact that we are in the middle of a change of age. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the precessional cycle of the Earth, that every 4,320 years we do experience a specific cycle which brings with it certain qualities. And that's why you come here at this particular time, is to experience these qualities. So the reason why it feels a little bit more ratcheted up right now is because we literally are crossing from one threshold into the next. And when you get that sort of crossing over, you do get a thinning of the veil. You do get all kinds of possibilities opening up. And in fact, one of the things that I was privy to when I was working with my channeling group in England is that and this, I think, affects everybody that's ever gone to a psychic or has had a reading done, because sometimes things don't quite come out the way that they were actually given to you. There were premonitions, there were predictions, and somehow they've changed. Well, at least listeners would be happy to know, at least I hope they will be, that everything that we're doing down here, all the things that we're doing, all the intentions, they're having repercussions on other levels of reality as well. So the change that we're trying to make down here is also happening on a spirit level. So there's a sort of wrangling going on. There's a sort of adaptation that's going on multiple levels. And I think the more sensitive of us are feeling those ripples of change. And that's what I think is making us believe that we are living in particularly dangerous and very unstable times where the dark is trying to take over. It's not really quite that black and white. It's more a matter of shades of gray, where there's a sort of a reinterpretation of what reality is about taking place. That's what really is happening. We're sort of feeling these rough the rough surf on a beach that's taking place. The surf is always there, the sand is always there, the tide always comes in and out during the day, always has. It's just that right now things are a little bit more uneven. And as we try to figure out as humans where we stand in the bigger picture and what we want to do with the outcome of these changes, so the dark is also manipulating itself into position to balance that, to balance all our intents. And also the spirit world is also balancing out the outcome. So nothing is actually written in concrete right now. Everything is in flux. The good news is that we are very close to hitting a critical mass. And for this, to believe this, you'll have to stop reading the media. And having worked in the media, I can tell you it's a good thing. I mean, you should always keep track of the headlines. If there's an article that you obviously you're interested in, check it out from the multiple sources and find out the truth. There's always different versions of the truth. But, I mean, you've got to find out what the snakes are up to. You can't live your life in a cave. Otherwise, it's pointless you being here on Earth if you're going to live in a cave. You might as well be in the other world and stay there. So you're here for the good of your soul. You might as well engage with it. The trick is not to get caught away with it, because if, let's say, the editors of 5 national newspapers suddenly decided that it would not be a good idea to cover the electrical nonsense that's going on at the moment, we would be none the wiser as to what really was happening in the election cycle, or what was happening over in like Nice, or the recent killing of the bishop in France, which is very unsavory. These editors would decide to put on the front page good news about there's a new machine that's cleaning up the environment, or a plane has just flown around the world on using solar energy. I mean, suddenly our identity, our whole idea of what's going on around us, immediately changes. So you see, tapping into all of that mainstream media is good to keep yourself in track of what's going on, but don't be fooled by the fact that it's the only thing that's happening. There's so many good things happening around us, and it's our mind gets focused on these headlines even when other things are happening. So it would only take, say, 5 different types of headlines on the front page of newspapers to completely change your idea of how the world really is. So if it's that simple, if only 5 newspapers are required to do that, then you can do that in your life as well by avoiding all this nonsense and focusing on what's important and the things that really matter in your life.
Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads. But there has been a democratization of access to information, certainly with the internet and with social media, which is to some extent keeping checks and balances, although certain people whose name I won't mention have learned to use it for nefarious purposes. But the Gnostic principle is that knowledge is freedom. And I think that we are opening ourselves up to accepting new knowledge in a way that we never have before.
Oh, absolutely. And in this respect, it's almost like we're actually mirroring in real life what was happening to the initiates going into the other world. They were coming back with information, knowledge about the mechanics of nature, of the soul, and everything. And here we are now, with the same access to just about anything you can think of in the world. How are we going to apply it? And back in the day with the mystics and the initiates, they would actually apply this, and this is the reason why it took 3 years to be initiated. You had to be responsible for this information. The people who are teaching you, the adepts, they wanted to make sure that you were someone who was going to apply this for the greater good. So inevitably, the people who went through this experience, this living resurrection experience, would apply this on a daily level to become not just exalted people, but also examples, pillars of the community. They went off to be fantastic architects, painters, writers, poets, leaders, kings, queens, and these are people who began to create model societies. So today we have the same potential to do this on a physical level. So there is a mirroring going on here of what was happening a couple of thousand years ago, even after the Greek era, by the way, and it was still being done in southern Europe and the Middle Ages with the Knights Templar. And here we have the same potential now to have access to all the information. The trick is, how are you going to apply that information? And are you going to be a better person at the end of the day? Are you going to try and create a better world around you? Yes, I think that there are plenty of examples of people all over the internet and in real life where they are applying this information to create a better life. There was just one I read recently that I think it was an Italian designer who created this fabulous little simple device, absolutely simple device, elegant too, where you can erect this in about an hour in the middle of a village in the middle of Africa, and it actually creates water out of thin air, simply by convection. So local villagers now have access to fresh water that literally comes off the air, and it's the idea is about convection, where you take hot air in the evening, the sun goes down, in the night it gets cold, so basically it condenses moisture onto a plate, and in the morning your bottle is filled with fresh water. It's that simple. It really is that simple.
Wow.
So there are people making a huge difference, and there are also people making not such a good difference, but that's the way it is down here on Earth. It's always been this way. Earth is a place where we come to play and experiment. I usually call it a big sandbox of the universe, and there are people who come here to build sandcastles, and then there are people who come here to knock it down. But you know what? If there weren't people building sandcastles, this place would be a terrible mess. And I think it's worth pointing that out because, like I said, we've come here to experience things. And sometimes when we've lost track of what we come here to do, that's when we need to go back to the process of initiation. To go leave the body for a little bit, go out of body in a conscious state, come back and find out, yes, that's what the plan is about. I'm back with the plan. And if you don't have a method of leaving the body successfully and coming back, and I've sort of, and I phrased that correctly, coming back successfully, because people do stupid things in places like the Great Pyramid, and people do die there thinking that they're going to have an out-of-body experience, and yes, they do, but they don't know how to get back, and before you know it, the pyramid is shut down for another 3 months. So you got to know what you're doing. People who do Kriya Yoga understand this process, where they have a very similar idea of the resurrection idea, because they have total control of their out-of-body state. That's the closest example I can find to people who don't have to lie in a sarcophagus or a deep cave in order to have that experience. People who did Kriya Yoga in a traditional sense apparently were able to do so consciously. So there are all these techniques available to us. But again, it's you got to remember that you are here to have an experience, and if you have access to this to good information, then apply it and make the place a better place than it was before you leave.
Well, from your lips to the ears of all our listeners and their hearts as well. Thank you, Freddie. You're going to be taking a tour to Peru, I understand.
We're going everywhere.
15 seconds to tell us about it.
I'm very excited to take a nice look. We have a few places left for the October tour of Peru. It's going to be great fun. You'll have to be fit, by the way. Then we're going to go to Yucatan and Guatemala in January, and then England, Scotland next year, and maybe a couple of other places as soon as I can figure out where to go.
And you can find out all about it, presumably, on Freddie's website, invisibletemple.com. Well, the lost art of resurrection, you heard all about it here. Thank you, Freddie Silva.
Thank you, Miriam. Appreciate it.
I'm Miriam Knight. Do join us next week. In the meantime, visit our website, ncreview.com. Many blessings. Goodbye.